It's September 30th, 1943, Naples, Italy. A group of German soldiers race swiftly to this rail yard, for it's their job to destroy this valuable railway junction. 10 weeks ago, when American and British troops landed in Italy, they have been gaining ground, and the Axis powers have been forced to retreat. Since Italy surrendered, Germany stands alone. It's the German soldiers' job to subvert and destroy anything that could aid the enemy. For tomorrow, Naples will fall. One German soldier places charges on every other rail. The other places a charge underneath the driving wheel of a locomotive. The resulting explosion destroys the track and makes the locomotive immovable. In the background, muffled charges can be heard as tank cars have holes blown in them. Interiors of passenger cars are completely gutted. Charges are put in journal boxes and in the fireboxes of locomotives. By the next morning, the entire rail yard is a landscape of twisted, smoldering metal. On October 1st, 1943, the Allied powers capture Naples. 1861, the start of the Civil War. The railroads, which will be a key to victory, are targeted for subversive warfare. Every mile of track, both north and south, will be hotly disputed. Both sides realize that control of the railroads will determine the outcome of battles. What an army cannot control, it must destroy. For the first time, artillery is mounted on special railroad cars. 13-inch siege mortars weighing over 7.5 tons are placed on railway flat cars and protected by wooden or metal shields. The weapons are aimed by moving the rail car along a curve on the track until the target is acquired. The armies explore methods of ambushing enemy trains. Derailing trains is a favorite tool of both northern and southern saboteurs. Train crews stay alert for missing rails or piles of ties placed across the tracks, and guards are placed near strategic railroad bridges. The rails themselves are targeted for destruction. Rails are pulled from the ground and placed over a stack of wooden ties. When set afire, the rails contort out of shape and become molten metal. These stacks of ruined rails, called Sherman's neckties, are strewn across the remaining tracks. E.C. Smead of the Union Army Construction Corps invents a set of horseshoe-shaped clamps, which, when attached to rails, twists them in a spiral and renders them unusable. Herman Haupt experiments with bridge demolition, using a torpedo-shaped explosive placed in holes in the wooden trusses. Confederate General Stonewall Jackson, transporting his men on little-known southern railroads, cuts northern supply lines and routs the Union forces protecting the critical Manassas Gap Railroad junction. Union General William Tecumseh Sherman's march through Georgia reduces Confederate railroads to scrap iron and ashes. Freight cars are destroyed by fire, leaving miles of track congested with their ruined frames and their metal wheels. Locomotives are ruined when cannonballs are shot through their boilers. Subversive warfare takes a toll on the combatants as well. The hospital train is introduced for the rapid evacuation of the wounded from the fields of fire, and the United States Military Railroad Hospital is founded. For the next 100 years of railroads at war, armies will develop these pioneering techniques of subversive warfare against trains. Civil War rail-mounted mortars will become the U.S. Navy heavy railway artillery used in World War I. The Union Army's Smead clamps will give birth to the German Army's Scarifier, the track-destroying device of World War II. Bridge demolition, once accomplished by a Confederate soldier's torch, will yield to the time-delayed high explosive used to destroy bridges in Korea. Railroad subversion in the Civil War drags on for 4 years, but in the end, geography is destiny. With almost all of the locomotive factories located in the North, the South cannot replace its wartime losses. Without the use of the railroads, the Confederate rebellion is essentially defeated before the first shot is fired. Sabotage can be as simple as putting sand in this journal box. That was easy. Now that would take out this entire rail car. Or it can be as complicated as putting a time bomb to take out an entire train. That's why men of the military railway system always have to be on guard. The year is 1968. The place? Vietnam at the height of the conflict. Under the watch of American soldiers in this port city, supplies for the United States Army are unloaded. They will be transported by train to American supply depots, then strategically deployed to the armies in the field. These crates contain the supplies that are the Army's essential support: food, clothing, medicine, munitions, radios, and other communications equipment. Security will be the key to their safe delivery. American soldiers and South Vietnamese soldiers and railroad workers combine their skills to deliver the supplies to the railroad. Trucks transport the supplies to the railroad station, which are then placed in freight cars to begin their journey. Massive forklifts called RTs, rough terrain fork trucks, are used to load thousands of pounds of equipment onto flat cars. A train is made up. It consists of freight cars, flat cars, and oil tankers pulled by a diesel locomotive. For 100 years of railroads in wartime, armies have depended on the railroad for logistical support. And in all of these wars, railroad soldiers have been on guard against sabotage. What is at stake here isn't simply rations or weapons. What is at stake here is quite simply life or death. There are no luxuries in times of war. This equipment, this fuel, these munitions must reach their destination, or lives will be lost. This is guerrilla warfare, and the rules of engagement do not apply. You begin your journey down a dangerous road. Even among these friendly faces, the enemy could be concealed. In the eyes of the enemy, your train must be stopped. You know that your cargo is his target. His mission is to stop you at all cost, even at the cost of your life. Every bridge you approach could disappear out from underneath you, collapsing in a ruin of smoke and fire. Every moment you're on this railroad bridge is a test of your belief in your fellow soldiers, in the men who have guarded this bridge and kept it secure from sabotage. It looks okay if no one let his guard down, if no enemy approached under cover of darkness. It looks okay, but you're riding a potential catastrophe on wheels, a train laden with fuel, which could suddenly become a fireball. It only takes a little while to make it across the bridge, but in your mind it seems like hours. The cars roll on, and now the engine is clear. Now the oil drums. Now the troops guarding the cargo. The people passing by look harmless, but you ask yourself, friend or foe? You keep alert for snipers. You scan the track ahead of you for signs of sabotage, the damage that might derail you, the explosives that might destroy your train and kill your men. Charting your route. Closer to your destination, stay alert. You ride an armored car, but you know that's not enough to protect you. You've seen subversive warfare, and there are horrors in your mind's eye. Your destination is finally in sight. Stay alert. Report your arrival to the guards waiting just ahead with a telegraph powered by a hand-crank generator. End of the rail line. Your mission's complete. You want to rest, but you stay on your guard. In war, there's no safe place. And no train is safe from sabotage.
A good place to wreck a train is in a tunnel. Takes time to clean it up, holds up traffic. The trick is to make the shot after your target gets in the tunnel. The mole takes care of that. The mole is a set of photoelectric equipment which, when plunged into sudden darkness, initiates an explosive charge. It consists of a photoelectric cell, the eye of the mole, a relay unit or amplifier, and a special electric detonator. The photocell, attached by magnets to its target, must be so placed that it can literally see the roadbed. Sensitized by light, this cell builds up an impulse from an accumulation of daylight. And when this light is suddenly removed, as happens when a train goes into a tunnel, the impulse is released and transmitted to the relay unit, where it is amplified into a charge sufficient to detonate the explosive. This electric charge activates the electric detonator, which is inserted in the explosive. Before using the mole, however, a test run was made to find out where to place a charge to get the most complete wreck. Using a four-wheel European-type boxcar, we put about 2 pounds of molded plastic explosive on top of its journal box. You reach the journal box between the pedestal and the wheel. The charge is well hidden there by the pedestal and spring. We put this car on the end of a long train of flat cars, got moving, and for convenience set the shot off electrically from inside the coach. Watch for the explosion on the left-hand side. We put the charge on the forward wheel of that side. It shattered the wheel all right, but didn't wreck the car. The coupling didn't break, and the car dragged several hundred feet before the train's brakes stopped it. The dragging pedestal damaged the ties. The broken wheel. The other wheel on that axle derailed. The rear wheels stayed on the track. It was decided that we could have done more damage if the coupling at the forward end of the car had broken. It's the standard European turnbuckle coupling with hook and link. To make sure of its breaking in the next run, we taped a pound of plastic explosive to the drawbar and put the knotted end of a primacord in it. A charge was placed on the pedestal as before, and the other end of the primacord put in that. The soft metal keepers protecting the magnets of the photocell come off. And to be sure of a good contact for the magnets, it's a good idea to scrape away the paint and rust on the inside of the pedestal. The electric detonator goes into the explosive. The relay unit sits on top of the charge and is fastened down with tape. Pull the arming pin and shove off. The charges are in the forward end of the third boxcar. They were set off by the mole, responding to the darkness of the tunnel. The charges shattered the wheel and part of the coupling, wrecking the train about 125 feet beyond the tunnel. The car carrying the explosive wound up upside down. The 3 cars behind it were completely wrecked. You can see what the drawbar explosion did. It seems apparent, then, that shattering a forward wheel of one of the cars and parting its coupling will wreck a train of European-type cars. To cut the axle, we used a linear-shaped charge containing 6 pounds of cast 50-50 pendolite. The bracket to hold it is made to clamp to the underside of the center sill of a freight car. The charge is secured in the bracket with 3 set screws. A hole takes the special electric detonator, which normally would connect to a mole. The charge was mounted directly over the axle, with its base about 9 inches above the top of the 5-inch axle. The train for the experiment consisted of locomotive and tender, coach, flats, and 2 gondola cars, all empty. It approached at 25 miles per hour. The charge is under the last car, above the rear axle of the front truck. Watch the beating the rear car takes after the axle is broken. The journals work free of the bearings. The airline severed by the explosion sets the brakes on the whole train. One wheel under the middle of the car tangles with the air brake gear, jacking up the rear truck as the train comes to a halt. The journals of the broken axle came out of these empty boxes. The other wheel is jammed under the middle structure. The center sill where the charge blew. We believe that the wreck would have been even more serious if the disabled car had been followed by a train with a heavy load. With the proper detonators and amplifiers, the mole will activate any type of demolition that can be placed on a train. Its purpose is to cause this kind of a mess in a tunnel.
It is the age of warfare on horseback. 2 soldiers place explosive charges on a bridge at its most vulnerable point. This is the Pioneer and Demolition Section of the United States Cavalry. Their objective, the destruction of rail lines, bridges, and telegraph lines, helping to halt the advance of the enemy. Trained in military sabotage, these troops carry demolition equipment. When the bridge is blown after the rear guard crosses, the regiment will know that no form of wheeled transport will be able to pursue them. Objective, to sever the enemy's rail line and to interrupt railroad communications. The war strength of the cavalry consists of 3 squadron sections, each with a corporal and 3 privates, and a sergeant as section chief. Each squadron consists of 3 pack outfits, carried by a pack animal and made up of 2 side loads. These side loads are carried in special hangars and are hung on a Phillips pack saddle. On horseback, the pioneer and demolition section has tremendous range of mobility, regardless of the obstacle. This allows them to pursue objectives that cannot be reached using other forms of transportation. The group, though small, carries a substantial amount of firepower and all of the equipment they need to complete their objectives. This box contains the Pioneer outfit. It contains 4 picks, 2 axes, 1 stone drill, 1 crosscut saw, 6 mining shovels, and 1 sledge. These demolition packs contain 50 pounds of explosives and incidental equipment. Including detonator caps, crimpers, fuses, and a drill. The cavalry uses half-pound blocks of TNT, noted for its great explosive power and remarkable stability. A block of TNT can be carried in a shirt pocket when it is impractical to carry the entire pack. A squadron carefully scouts their target. The regimental commander, having listened to the scouting reports, explains the objectives to his staff. Each squadron section receives its orders. One is detailed to interrupt the main railroad line, and others to destroy the communication lines. TNT offers an effective means of knocking down telegraph poles. Several blocks of the explosive are placed together on one side of the pole and are held securely in place by wrapping tape around the pole and the blocks. The fuse is lighted and the men seek cover. The resulting explosion demolishes the pole and cuts the wires. Another squadron will cut the wires at another location. The lead squadron reaches the railroad track, which it is to destroy. Properly placed, a few blocks of TNT will effectively interrupt rail communication. The charge is prepared. It consists of 2 blocks of TNT staggered on opposite sides of the rail. When detonated, the TNT will cause an explosion that severs the rail. Blocked from going forward, unable to telegraph for a repair crew, the enemy train will waste precious time going backwards to seek help, giving other cavalry squadrons time to complete their missions.
Wrecking trains is serious business. This is possibly the first time that men with explosives have had the opportunity to actually practice sabotaging railroad cars and a locomotive. Because no one wants to carry 100 pounds of explosives on his back, we need to know how little is needed. While she's still in one piece, let's introduce the opponent. The 280 locomotive tips the scales at 53 tons, tender at 49. First two gondolas, gravel-loaded and groaning under a gross weight of 65 tons each. Third gondola, filled with ties, hugging the track with a 40-ton burden. The remaining cars, empty, weigh in at 25. Okay, let's back up here. Have you any ideas on how to wreck a train? Sounds easy, doesn't it? It would be easier on a curve, but we're going to wreck this one with only two 8-ounce charges of plastic explosive on a straightaway. Placed 6 inches apart, they will blow a 12-inch gap in an 85-pound rail. That's strange. Nothing happened. Hardly got a bump out of it. Let's take a telephoto look in slow motion. We would call this 12-inch gap a railroad chuck hole. But not a trap for wrecking trains. Evidently we didn't place the charges far enough apart. This time we'll blow out two 8-inch gaps and leave a sleeper in between 20 inches long. When 350 tons of rolling freight crashes into this, look out. The locomotive has no steam. She gets a good shove by a pusher engine and coasts down the straight section of the track towards the gap, where something's gone wrong again. The tie under the 20-inch section gives a little, but it won't let go of the rail. The empty cars wobbled, but did not derail. So we'll knock out that 20-inch sleeper. With a 36-inch gap, she'll go caboose over engine. The engine's pilot wheels are only 30 inches in diameter. When they drop off the track, the driving wheels should drop off also. Well, what they should do, they didn't. Only the pilot wheels derailed. The driving wheels rode the gap like a Jeep jumps a rut. The first two ties were broken, but that only made the empties bounce a little more. The 36-inch gap should have done the trick, but what we really need is a gap in both rails. So we'll take a 30-inch section from each track. The two gaps are exactly opposite, and there won't be the tendency of one wheel keeping the other headed back for the rail. Keep your eye on the gaps. That's where she'll wreck. Another dud. Wait a minute. No use going on with this run. Not one single wheel derailed, not even the pilot wheels. Those gaps being exactly opposite each other made the setup too evenly balanced. This time they're staggered with the centers offset 15 inches. Now the wheels will get a twist and decidedly bear off to one side or the other. The gaps can't be seen from here, but it's at the same point. The pilot wheels flipped off again, but that doesn't wreck trains. 5 runs over an assorted pattern of broken tracks. By theory, any one of them should have wrecked her. But there's one fact that we positively know. No train can float over a 58-inch gap. The pilot wheels are 30 inches in diameter and the driving wheels are 50. Trains run on tracks, not ties. That's simple deduction, with the kind of logic that makes for good train wrecking. This time we'll give our stubborn customer an extra wide berth. She'll hit that open space at 26 miles an hour, and when she does, nothing happens to the engine. Tender, first, second, third, fourth. Ah, now we're getting somewhere. Let's take a closer look at that. Running light, the wheels bounced right off the track, but those are the empties. The loaded cars are still on the track. These cars really hang together. That makes 6 runs, 6 upsets, and 6 theories disproved. We'll try it once more, with 60 inches of rail out of one track and 30 out of the other. The centers of the gaps will be offset by 30 inches. That's a lot of track to blow out, but obviously it can't be wrecked on less. Okay, engineer, give her a hard push. Here she comes, and there go the cars. The tender's front trucks straddled the rail, drifted off the ties, and wrecked the other cars. But the old iron horse just wouldn't bite the dust. We now have a better understanding of why efforts in subversive warfare sometimes fail. By these tests, we have proved that wrecking engines is not easy. To minimize the uncertainties of success in the field, the Office of Strategic Services intends to continue experimental operation.
Italy, October 1943. Behind the lines are the smoldering ruins of a railroad track and miles of twisted railroad ties pulled from the ground by the subversive weapon known as the Scarifier. Retreating German soldiers worked frantically to destroy railroad bridges before they fall into the hands of the Allied armies. After intensive Allied bombing and German demolition, virtually no major railroad bridge has been left undamaged. Thousands of masonry piers are now piles of rubble. This is enemy sabotage. Sometimes, though, the railroad falls victim to friendly fire. June 1950, Seoul, Republic of South Korea. The Han River Bridge, gateway to Seoul, is destroyed by the retreating South Korean army to prevent it from falling into the hands of the invading forces of North Korea. 9 months later, after this capital has changed hands 4 different times, the U.S. 8th Army retakes Seoul from the North Korean invaders. Now the Han River Bridge must be rebuilt so that American troops and equipment can be brought in by railroad to protect the city. Supervising the reconstruction are Lieutenant General James A. Van Fleet, the commanding general of the 8th Army in Korea, and Colonel Pat Strong of the 8th Army Engineers. In less than 3 months, senior U.S. military brass ride the first locomotive as it crosses the Han River Bridge into Seoul. Regardless of which army destroys a bridge, the railroad must go on. In Italy, as in Korea, it is the job of the Corps of Engineers to construct and repair railroad bridges.
We're looking down on the Volturno River in Italy, where the enemy has blown up many bridges to stall the forward movement of our troops. The results are vividly illustrated in these scenes, with the Volturno presenting an awful panorama of demolished structures. American engineers must push in swiftly and counter the delaying action by constructing new bridges for use by our advancing troops. Various types of fixed bridges are employed. And as we move in to show the first specific job, we find our engineers removing any mines that may have been left by the fleeing enemy. This is naturally of first importance. Now a surveying party makes use of the transit to lay out the center line of the new bridge. Next comes the preparation of the abutment. It is to be emphasized that all the scenes in this film were photographed by combat camera crews. They recorded every operation possible to shoot under the conditions. Engineers unload parts for a Bailey Bridge, a prefabricated portable structure already used extensively in this war. The panels shown here are part of the launching nose. They are held together by panel pins. Transoms serve as the supporting beams of the roadway. Before construction is completed, it's necessary to push the partly built launching nose out over the gap. Stringers are placed to support the chest. The latter are held in place by ribbons or curbs, which are bolted down by ribbon bolts in the manner shown. The bridge is then launched by manpower. The need for teamwork cannot be stressed too strongly at this point. The engineers completing the job have been trained in this particular type of work. They know just how to handle any situation. Finally, the new bridge is jacked down into place on its bearings, ready now for use. The Bailey Bridge may also be adapted to other construction methods. For instance, as a railroad bridge of the type shown, a 120-foot triple-double type supported at its center by the remains of a demolished pier. Those destroyed piers in the distance represent what was once a 1,200-foot bridge. Reconstructing the old bridge would be a job requiring too much time, so the engineers proceed as follows. Temporary bridges are built, such as this 140-foot triple single Bailey, reinforced by 4 bays of double-story construction. Floating as well as fixed bridges are employed. And here we see one of the temporary pontoon bridges, built so that heavy equipment can be moved over the river. As for the new 1,200-foot bridge, it was constructed first as a single Bailey and launched by hand over rocking rollers on each pier. It was then converted to a double single truss. A problem of supply sometimes presents itself. The Bailey Bridge equipment is needed in a forward area. So, here a trestle bridge is built underneath the Bailey. The Bailey equipment can then be removed and carried forward for bridge construction elsewhere in the combat zone. No obstacle is too difficult to surmount. Right now, we see retaining walls being backfilled with rock to form an abutment. It's the beginning of an operation made necessary when the approach to a bridge has to be extended to shorten the length of the gap. The A-frame on the bumper of this truck is used as a crane to move logs and stringers into place. The retaining wall is tied into the bank by headers and guy wires, with railroad rails used to help hold the wall. Construction on the timber trestle bench goes on while the abutments are prepared. Local labor is brought in to help finish the job. The men are assigned to build masonry revetments around the bottom of the trestle bench. Protection is provided for the concrete while it's setting. They can relax now, for the bridge is ready. So the engineers carry out their assignments on many fronts, constructing countless new bridges with skill and speed.
It's September of 1918, and the theater of war spreads across all of Europe. For the last 4 years, there have been long standoffs, bloody offensives, and prolonged counteroffensives. With no single front line, an army must be mobile, and heavy railway artillery has changed the very nature of warfare. The U.S. Naval Railway Battery, the Allied response to the huge German artillery, leaves the railway shop at Saint-Nazaire. Accompanied by the French railway guns, the American railway artillery moves out to mount an offensive against German-held bases and positions. The United States Navy has 5 14-inch railway-mounted guns. Guns 1 and 2, manned by American crews, are sent out to supplement French guns northeast of Paris. The first American target is Tournai, an important German-held railroad junction. It is here that the first American gun crew will fire the first American gun at a German target. French soldiers unload shells and powder bags from a specially fitted-out munitions car. The French railway gun is the sliding type, meaning that the entire mechanism slides back on the track upon firing to disperse recoil shock. Because of this movement, the ammunition car is kept far enough away from the railway gun to avoid an accidental collision. Shells are brought to the gun by means of a shuttle car. The equalizing apparatus on the shuttle car allows for the rapid lading of shells, weighing up to 2,200 pounds. The shells are hoisted up onto the loading mechanism. Two men move the shell down an overhead trolley, where it is eased into the breech. This is the screw-type breech, which permits rapid reloading. When loaded, a brass cartridge case prevents dangerous propellant gases from escaping. The railway gun is elevated and the target is acquired. When fired, the gun slides back on the track from 10 to 15 feet. It will have to be repositioned before it can again fire on enemy positions. The year is 1918. The place, Verdun, France. The U.S. Navy has deployed 5 great guns in the field, similar to dreadnought turret guns. Guns 3, 4, and 5 are here. Today, their target is a railroad junction. The Great War has seen unprecedented growth in the mobility of artillery. It accompanies the foot soldier, supports the cavalry, attacks fortresses, defends coastlines, and now, with the use of railway mounting, heavy railway artillery has become the battleship of the field, capable of firing 1,400-pound projectiles for a distance of nearly 25 miles. These gun crews, traveling with a rail-mounted battery, are quartered in the train, which carries berthing and kitchen facilities. Here the Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet, Admiral Mayo, and his staff inspect the battery. These guns are pit-mounted. Work crews move ahead of the guns, digging pits and laying rails across pit foundation materials. The mounting is then bolted to a heavy cast bed plate, which prevents the gun train from sliding back on the track when the gun is fired. Recoil shock is dispersed into the pit foundation. A 14-inch shell weighing 1,400 pounds is unloaded from the ammunition car. Overhead, an Allied aviator returns from a reconnaissance flight behind German lines. Ammunition cars are moved away from the guns. A small stand of trees serves as camouflage for the artillery train. The reconnaissance plane signals the range and direction of the enemy's target via wireless communication. A signalman hurries the wireless message to the fire control car. Fire control, which has telephone to each gun, will coordinate the assault. Large cloth panels are placed on the ground to signal the aviator. The message, ready to fire. Gun 3 prepares to fire. The aviator clears the area of artillery fire. Fire control telephones Gun 4. Elevation, 43 degrees. Range, 23.9 miles. The gun is elevated. The breech end swings down into the pit as the gun is positioned. The Gun 5 signalman receives his instruction. Direction, elevation, range, all ready. Stand by. Prepare to fire. The command is given. Gun 3, fire. Gun 4, fire. 3, fire. 4, fire. Gun 5, fire. Fire, fire, fire. And now the balance of battle has changed. The U.S. naval railway batteries have caused widespread destruction of the German-held rail junction. The bombardments have destroyed the railroad supply lines. Cut off from reinforcements and rations, the Germans have been forced to retreat. There are two ways of looking at heavy railway artillery. If you're firing it at your enemy, it's one of the best weapons you can have. But if your enemy's firing at you, it's one of the weapons you fear the most. In either case, there's many casualties in the cause and effect of war. Fall 1944. Paris has been liberated, and the German army, squeezed between Allied armies in Italy, France, and Russia, engages in increasingly frantic efforts to protect its dwindling territory. Soon little will be left except the fatherland itself, if the Allies can be kept from crossing the Rhine River. Under cover of camouflage netting, the artillery has slept. Now it comes alive, ready once again to answer the call of war. With captured French railway artillery, with Germany's own massive railway guns, with rail-mounted coast defense guns, the German army stages a desperate defense. The heavy railway artillery, which caused such incredible destruction in World War I, is now an old soldier, all but obsolete since airplanes became the weapons of choice for heavy bombardment in this Second World War. Its age, however, has not affected its power. The sons of the Third Reich strain under the weight of 1,000-pound shells, with slave labor augmenting their efforts. In all heavy guns, the weight of the shell directly relates to its destructive power. The gun itself is the machine which delivers the shell's destructive force. A locomotive with tens of thousands of pounds of tractive effort hauls forth another artillery behemoth. Now is revealed the descendant of the Paris gun, one of the most powerful pieces of heavy railway artillery of the previous war. The huge barrel strains skyward. The direction and distance are set. Across many miles, the gun rains death and injury on the unseen opponent. In the far distance, untold damage is suffered. Another gun is laid. Again and again, the railway artillery is reloaded. Spent shells litter the landscape. The German soldiers follow their shots, hoping that the advance has been stopped. In this awesome display of firepower, a low groan is heard. It comes not from the Allied forces, but from the last remaining Axis power. It is the death rattle of the German military machine. The Front Line, Toul, France, 1918. For these sons of America, the rail line is a lifeline, the line to healing, the line away from the rigors of battle. The rail line has brought them to the evacuation hospital to be treated with care by their brothers in arms. Here a hospital train waits for them, waits to take them away from the noise and the pain and the closeness of death. One by one they come. Some borne on the shoulders of their comrades, some struggling, except a friendly hand. On and on they come. America's hope for a future which at last promises peace. 250,000 wounded. Men who have laid their bodies on the altar of freedom, now in need of a healing hand. Here in the hospital train, they will find the doctor who will aid them and the corpsman who will tend them. The doors are closed on the years of battle. And now the railroad, which has carried these boys across distant lands, which has supported them through the years of combat, which has seen them grow into men as they fought to defend liberty, carries them to healing, carries them to freedom. Carries them back to loved ones, waiting silently by the door. At last, at long last, the war train carries them home. It's March 1951. We're in Northeast Korea on a railroad bridge, 75 miles from the Chinese border. For 8 months, since the Chinese Communists and North Koreans invaded South Korea, the UN forces, led by the American military, have battled to force the invaders out. Both sides fight for possession of railroads, railroad junctions, and railroad bridges, vital links to the transportation of supplies and reinforcements. Objective, a bridge which Navy flyers call Carlson's Canyon. The bridge spans the river, is 600 feet long and 60 feet high. The bridge is a very important target because the Chinese Communists and North Korean invaders use this bridge to transport all their supplies and reinforcements to their East Coast positions. If this bridge can be destroyed, the UN forces will have a vital foothold in pushing the North Korean invaders out of South Korea. It's March 2nd. The quiet of the morning is interrupted by the roar of Navy bombers. Huge explosions echo here in the canyon. When the smoke clears, the southern end of the bridge is hanging precariously. The next morning, 2 Navy bombers, each carrying 3 2,000-pound bombs, fly in fast and low. They scored direct hits. One span topples to the canyon floor. The other is hanging precariously. Two others are knocked completely out of line. The bridge is out of action and denied to the use of the enemy. For now, it looks like this war is planes against trains. But this battle has been won by those who plan and execute air attacks.
The communications network above Rome is attacked in an effort to choke off supplies for the German 14th Army to the south. P-47 fighter bombers concentrated on this area. May 1st, strafing and bombing a railroad tunnel at Terrazzano. Target, Civitavecchia, just west of Rome, May 7th. Starting at 7,000 feet, a formation of Thunderbolts dives on the harbor, each plane carrying two 500-pound bombs. Two large ships and several small ones may be seen tied up at the docks. Target, railroad tracks near Perugia. Starting at only 800 feet, P-47s bomb and strafe the railroad station and a train at Perugia, and strafe another target in the area. Target, Bagni de Casciana. Diving through very heavy flak, P-47s bomb and strafe ammunition and petrol dumps near Bagni. The pilot saw several small buildings blow up. Flames reached to 500 feet. Some smoke is white, some black, indicating ammunition and fuel fires. Target, motor transport north of Chiusi. A flight of P-47 strafes targets on the highway. A preceding plane in the flight may be seen firing during the run. Making a 180-degree peel-off, another Thunderbolt with a wing-mounted camera dives at the point where railroad tracks enter a tunnel. Hits are scored right at the mouth of the tunnel. Target, Monte Savino. The camera plane attacks a railroad bridge across a canal. Dive starts at 2,000 feet, pull out at 500. A preceding plane in the flight scores a hit on the railroad tracks at the top of the screen.
There's no doubt about it. Airplanes are fast, agile, and dangerous. Where do airplanes come from? Well, airfields. But some airfields start on trains. The armed services are interconnected, fulfilling regularly scheduled support tasks, but also helping each other out when the need arises. Trains bring troops and equipment to the ports where they embark, and trains are waiting when they disembark to move the men and supplies to the front lines. Trains bring the wounded to airfields, where they are flown to a safe haven to recuperate. In this case, the trains bring the airfield itself. The train brings heavy earth-moving machinery and grading equipment to the place where a temporary airfield is to be constructed. Everyone turns his attention to his assigned job. Men move ahead of the equipment, carefully checking for landmines, as bulldozers make their passes at leveling the land. A surveying team works together to plot the runway's coordinates. When the area is marked and measured, a grading team moves through and smooths the ground so the runway matting can be laid down. Now that the land is ready, a train made up of flat cars carrying steel plank runway matting is unloaded. These men of the United States Air Force will set up the temporary airfield. This is the steel plank type of transportable runway. It's called Marston matting. It is used in areas of operations where airfields are needed, but none are available. Sometimes they are set up to allow our aircraft to penetrate deeply behind enemy lines in theaters of war where available airfields are in the hands of the enemy. The steel plank matting is constructed so that any piece can be laid down in any order. Overlapping hinges hold the pieces together. Locking units are driven into each section, fitting them securely together and fastening them to the ground. From this runway, planes will take off to launch aerial attacks on a variety of targets, including enemy railroads and rail equipment, ships at anchor in enemy harbors, enemy fighter aircraft in flight, and enemy planes at their airfields. With the men working as a team, the airfield rapidly goes in place. In short order, American planes will be landing here to prepare for their missions behind enemy lines. And when enemy airfields are captured, this temporary airfield will be taken apart and loaded back on a train to be transported to the next location where the Air Force can use the helping hand of the railroad. The war train rolls on. Up above, in the concealment of clouds, airplanes are searching for their targets. Objective: stop the railroad. Security troops, armed and alert, watch for any possible dangers as the train moves through the countryside. Objective: the safe delivery of men and equipment to relieve war-weary troops on the front line. This is a cat-and-mouse game. But the war train has no place to hide. The machine gun crew maintains its vigilance. Suddenly, destruction rains from the skies as bombs fall everywhere. The sound of explosions fill the air. A shockwave rocks the train as the tracks take a direct hit. With nowhere to go, the war train comes to a stop. As the sound of airplane engines fade in the distance, the engineer, fireman, and brakeman survey the damage. The brakeman uses prearranged signals to send a message to the caboose, and train specialists spring into action. The conductor tells the signalman to contact the train dispatcher. Help is just down the iron line. Security troops, alert for signs of the enemy, move to their vantage points to protect the train during the repairs. The call goes out from signalman to operator to dispatcher, and finally to the first sergeant, whose job it is to call out the wrecker crew. In this simulated air attack, training and discipline come to the fore as troops rush into action. Riflemen with full pack move out. Others load railroad ties. One class of repair crew moves by motor truck over land, carrying bulldozers. The other crew uses railroad motor cars. Now the trucks arrive on the scene, and the crew unloads the earth-moving equipment. The troops remove the broken ties, and the bulldozer rolls in to fill the bomb craters. When the section crew arrives, they unload the truck and lay the new ties. The train is nearly ready to roll on. The new rails are set in place, and as the angle bar bolts are tightened, we know this battle is won, and the victor is the railroad. It's 1944, and the war rages on many fronts. The American and British allies have just driven the Germans out of North Africa and Italy, and are preparing for the liberation of France. The war still rages on the Russian front. In the Pacific theater, the Chinese are attempting to repulse the Japanese invasion. The military railway service is called upon to move supplies by rail through India and Burma. Later, they'll be flown over the Himalayas into China. Here in India, the military railway service, now part of the Army's Transportation Corps, carries men to help in the delivery of military equipment to China. The men and equipment are moved over 804 miles of the Bengal and Assam Railway. In addition to transporting goods for the Chinese war effort, the military railway service is also transporting workers and hauling supplies for the construction of Indian airfields to support the airlift to China.
A B-29, America's newest heavy bomber, lands at a secret base in the interior of China. Several of these bases were built especially to accommodate the superfortress. Native Chinese labor under the supervision of a few American engineers was used in the construction of these airfields.
Like a page torn from the history of ancient China is this scene of laborers toiling with primitive tools. But today, people of the new China are building aerodromes from which fighting planes are repelling the Japanese invader. Working almost entirely without modern equipment, they are carving miracles out of the wilderness. With no cement available, they use rocks broken by hand, cracked granite mixed with mud. With no steamroller to flatten the landing strip, 300 men haul a heavy roller across the terrain. The mass power and courage of China's millions is proving more than a match for the Japanese. Already from aerodromes like this, China is striking back.
During World War II, 3.5 million tons of bombs were dropped by the combined air forces. Roughly 32%, or 15,000 tons per month, were dropped on railroad targets, including locomotives, bridges, marshalling yards, tracks, and tunnels.
Marauders of the 9th Air Force fly over the invasion surface fleet, past the beachhead to strike at enemy concentrations. The first Allied field hospital set up in France, and fields littered with abandoned German equipment are passed on the way to the target. The Marauders dropped their bombs from 2,000 feet at railroad tracks and scored direct hits. During invasion activities, the B-26s bombed from lower altitudes to increase accuracy. The vicinity of Caen, one of the main enemy strongholds, is heavily bombed. Marauders attack the woods to the rear of the town, which conceal concentrations of enemy troops, vehicles, and tanks. Bombing from 2,000 feet, the B-26s are rocked by the concussion. Early in the morning, Marauders bomb a wooded dispersal area south of Caen, which German tanks entered during the night for refueling. Nearby Allied troops were pulled back before the bombing. Target, the railway bridge over the Noiro River. Bombing altitude, again 2,000 feet. En route back to base, the Marauders pass over the Bay of the Seine, crowded with another invasion fleet.
Despite increased threat from enemy aircraft, the war train continued down its iron road. During World War I, heavy railway artillery was used to bombard enemy targets. During World War II, that role changed to bomber aircraft. Ironically, one of the principal targets of the bomber was the railroad. Wartime railroads are the targets of sabotage, artillery fire, and aerial bombardment. But to bring trains completely to a halt, you need a comprehensive plan. In any attack against the railroads, it is not enough to target rail lines and equipment alone. Supply routes must be severed. Rolling stock must be destroyed. Railroad personnel stopped, and supporting industries must be eliminated. The enemy's motor transport is carrying their train crews, so we must attack their highways. The enemy's ships are bringing replacements for damaged locomotives, and so we must attack their ports. The enemy's airplanes are targeting our vital rail lines, and so our planes must attack their airfields and airplanes. The enemy must be denied fuel, denied ammunition, denied rations, denied reinforcements, denied the ability to replace their losses. To achieve these ends, an army must totally eliminate the enemy's ability to mobilize troops and equipment. Of all the forms of military logistical support, why is the railroad so important? Consider this example. The year is 1952. The place is Korea. General James A. Van Fleet, a veteran of World War II, is the commanding general of the 8th Army in Korea. After years of first-hand experience in uniform, the general is an expert on rail transport and the winning of wars. In a report to the American Association of Railroads, General Van Fleet says, "My experience has convinced me that railroads occupy the primary and basic consideration in any logistical plan. Other means of transport, important as they are in specialized situations, are supplemental or auxiliary. It's no wonder that trains are always on the priority list for attacks by air. It's obvious, isn't it, that the railroad is vulnerable to attack. After all of the rolling stock, all of the tracks are in plain sight. They can't be hidden away until you're ready to use them. Next, the track is immovable. It can't be picked up and shifted out of the range of attack planes. Then, of course, locomotives and cars are track-bound. Once in place, it takes the power of massive cranes to lift them off the track, and it's never possible to move them under the split-second conditions of combat. We've seen how the instruments of air attacks, bombs, rockets, incendiary devices, and strafing cause tracks and trains to suffer enormous devastation. The railroad is an easy target, right? In fact, the railroad has terrific resistance to disabling damage. It requires a consistent and continual effort to stop the trains. In order to put a railroad out of action and keep it out of action, you must cut its lines of communications, cut off its sources of raw materials, cut off or destroy its points of manufacture, and cut off or destroy its supply depots and transportation systems. And remember, you must inflict damage via bombing runs, rocket attacks, and strafing at a rate in excess of the railroad's ability to be repaired. Rarely does an army have the resources to consistently attack all 4 targets. Only in the case of intense, prolonged, comprehensive heavy bombing, such as the all-out offensive prior to D-Day, can serious, long-term damage be done to the railroad. Now let's look at the defenses the railroad has against air attacks. Some defenses are remarkably simple. Supplies, rolling stock, and labor can be replaced, and routes can be repaired. Another advantage, brought about by the fact that a railroad is a transportation system, is that damage is always localized. Destroy the train, and there are hundreds of others. Destroy this rail yard, and a few dozen men can build a bypass in a couple of days. To the experienced railroad worker, there's nothing new to be seen in the damage inflicted in a war upon a railroad. There are 150 years of examples of how to repair locomotives, how to repair damaged rails and ties, how to lay a rail, how to fill in craters in the roadbeds, how to bypass damaged bridges. UN forces are continually vexed in their efforts to stop the railroads by simple tricks of deception as to the extent of damage. The North Koreans are experts at simulating bomb damage. They use camouflage, placing hay bales and broken timbers over perfectly usable track. From the air, a reconnaissance team sees what appears to be bomb craters in the roadbed and reports that the rail line is out. Now, imagine the sight of a railroad bridge span floating down a stream, with several hundred North Korean and Chinese soldiers guiding it to a tunnel to hide it during the day. As soon as darkness falls, the communist troops float it back into place so that their supply train can run at night. This goes on in numerous locations until Navy reconnaissance takes night photographs of railroad bridges believed to be destroyed and sees trainload after trainload of communist troops and supplies moving along under cover of darkness. There is one simple fact that soldier railroaders the world over understand. No army should ever underestimate the ability of railroaders to improvise, substitute, and shortcut. They've had a lot of practice. How effective have air attacks been on the railroads? Let's recall the story of the railroad bridge in Korea called Carlson's Canyon. It's been widely damaged by numerous 2,000-pound bombs dropped by Navy bombers. In a surveillance flight, just 1 week later, the Navy pilots see that cribbing now supports the railroad bridge, which is almost ready to be used again. Another strike is called. 3 spans are destroyed, and a 4th is dropped from the abutment. Within 48 hours, the North Koreans have begun repairs again. Yet another strike destroys 5 of the 6 spans. This time, communist forces build a bypass around the destroyed bridge. For 2 months, strike after strike kept the bridge out of service. But despite the combined power of Navy and Air Force flyers, the enemy was never kept from supplying his needs, and rail sidings held steadily throughout the war. But sometimes air attacks buy time, valuable time in which the enemy's men and supplies are kept from their front line. And so the battle of planes versus trains rages on. A bird of prey takes wing in the skies over North Vietnam. The Douglas A-4E Skyhawk has taken flight from its nest. The attack carrier the USS Independence. The Independence roosts in Yankee Station, an area off the Vietnamese coast from which all airstrikes over North Vietnam are launched. The Skyhawk stalks its prey below. Target: the Quy Vinh Railroad Station. From its 4 underwing strongpoints, the Skyhawk can fire missiles and rockets or drop up to 8,000 pounds of bombs. Today's weapon of choice, the Zuni air-to-ground rocket. The first Skyhawk in the strike force fires on outlying structures that could protect the railroad with a concealed stash of deadly surface-to-air missiles. The plane makes evasive maneuvers. The pilot always alert for signs of anti-aircraft fire. With 8,500 pounds of thrust from his Pratt & Whitney J-52 engine to push it clear of danger, the Skyhawk rises into the cover of clouds and disappears. Again and again through 10 dark years of war, they will swoop through the skies in strike formation, seeking their prey. Skyhawks will earn the singular distinction of making more raids over North Vietnam than any other type of aircraft. They will seek out and attack fixed installations, including railroad bridges, highways, railway stations, and support facilities. On and on they fly, ranging up to 3,000 miles at a maximum speed of 680 miles per hour. And now the railroad comes into view. A Zuni rocket flies and falls short. A second and a third miss their mark. But finally, a rocket strikes the heart of the target, and the Skyhawk climbs the air, up, up, and away from the enemy railroad.
Gun-side aiming point camera records fighter attacks over Europe. An Me-109 is shot down. Over an airfield, a Focke-Wulf 190. A locomotive by the same pilot. A Junkers 88. A parachute opens as a member of the crew bails out. Two locomotives. A Focke-Wulf 190. Another enemy fighter crashes and explodes. An Me-109. On the ground, 3 Junkers 88s are struck. An Me-410 on the deck. Same pilot, same day, 2 locomotives. Ground objectives struck. An Me-109 caught while coming in for a landing. An Me-110. A Focke-Wulf 190. Target, airfield on the outskirts of Bucharest, Romania. On August 26th, B-17s of the MAF, operating in support of the Romanian government, which on the previous day had declared war on Germany, dropped more than 250 tons on the Otopeni airfield, 9 miles north of Bucharest. By September 1st, the Russians had captured the town. Target, railroad bridge 40 miles southeast of Budapest, Hungary. On August 27th, Italy-based bombers hit the Sajol Railroad Bridge over the Titsa River, near the Sajol marshalling yards. Each plane carried 6 1,000-pounders. The bombing run was made at 21,000 feet. This attack was pushes in the Balkans and northern Italy to hinder German withdrawals. About 5,000 tons were dropped on the main rail lines of Yugoslavia and Hungary. Within a month of this raid, the Russians had pressed their advance through the Balkans into Hungary, last big German satellite. Target, Siena, an important point in the Italian railroad system. Preceding our ground offensive against the German armies below Rome, the Tactical Air Force struck out at the Italian transportation network, an all-out assault against communications north of Rome to cut off the flow of supplies to the enemy. Marauders from Sardinia, bound for the Arezzo and Boccini viaducts, abandoned the primary target because of bad weather. They made an unplanned run on the large railway yards at Siena on the alternate Florence-Rome railway line. These yards contained many units of rolling stock. The bomb run started at the south end of the yards at an altitude of 10 to 11,000 feet. 1,000-pound bombs were laid in good concentration. Photo interpretation reported that all the tracks were definitely cut and both choke points of the railway yards were hit. Some of the bombs hit warehouses on either side of the tracks. On the left side of the screen, direct hits may be seen on tracks and rolling stock. No enemy fighters or flak were encountered by the 36-ship formation. Target, railway installations at the port of Leghorn. From an altitude of between 9,500 to 11,000 feet, 34 Marauders dropped a good concentration of bombs on the railway yards. The southern and central parts of the yards were hit heavily with 500-pounders. Hits were also scored on marshalling yards just alongside the dock. Damage caused here hampered both rail and sea traffic. We suffered no losses. Oggibansi, another target on the alternate Florence-Rome rail line. From an altitude of 12,000 feet, Marauders aimed 500-pounders, 8 bombs to a plane, at a railroad bridge outside Oggibansi. This railroad bridge was hard to hit and easy to repair. It had to be attacked continually in order for the operation to be effective. The strangling of the German communications south of Florence proceeded according to plan. Prisoner statements and intelligence reports indicated that Kesselring's divisions in Italy were getting only 170 tons of supplies per day per division. It was estimated that the German divisions would need at least 200 tons per day against an Allied offensive. On April 22nd, the railroad bridge near the marshalling yards at Poggibonsi was attacked by 36 Marauders of the 12th Air Force. Escorted by Corsica-based AAF Spitfires, they dropped their 500-pound bombs from an altitude of about 10,000 feet. The same formation destroyed the viaduct at Tabbianello on the same day. Pictures taken after the raid show the bridge and marshalling yards crippled. Target in Chisa, another important link in the chain of rail communication. 1,000-pound bombs were aimed by B-26s at a steel railway bridge south of Incisa, a vital supply line on the direct Florence to Rome Railroad. 24 Marauders, escorted by AAF Spitfires from Corsica, at altitudes of about 10,000 feet, dropped bombs fused at instantaneous. This is usual with open-work steel structures to prevent the bombs from going through open spaces before exploding. Concussion of the instantaneously fused bombs rocked ships flying at 10,000 feet. Neither flak nor interception was encountered. At least 2 direct hits were scored on the bridge. A good concentration cut both approaches and put the bridge out of commission for some time to come. Target, Porto San Stefano. On May 12th, our strategic air force concentrated on harbors along the west coast of Italy all the way up to Genoa. Liberators attacked Porto San Stefano, about 75 miles northwest of Rome. 225 tons of bombs were dropped from an altitude of 18,500 feet. Hits were scored on harbor installations, and great damage was caused. Railroad yards and tracks were covered by bombs. Little flak and no fighters were encountered. All of our planes returned safely.
In the waning days of combat, there's a last chance to stop and consider the monumental damage caused by war. The amount of killed and wounded is incalculable. Entire cities have been reduced to rubble. Prisoners of war and refugees strain the railway system. Many miles of rail line and thousands of pieces of rolling stock have been destroyed. But the railway system goes on. For the war trains, there's still an important job to do.
The 46-day siege of Brest completely wrecked the great port. No place in the city or suburbs and very little in the harbor was left undamaged. Because of Nazi fanaticism, no city in France suffered destruction on a vaster scale than this. Here was the railroad station and what was left of the trains. Flying toward the harbor, the big shipping works and great docks were valleys of crumpled masonry, sometimes covering whole ships, whose smokestacks poked crazily out of the wreckage. The 15 great submarine pens, with 20-foot thick concrete roofs and walls, still stood almost intact. The framework for a dozen more uncompleted pens stood half collapsed against the solidity of the others. Not a submarine had been left behind. Ships had apparently been scuttled to block the harbor and prevent its easy use by the Allies. One ship was sunk right at the harbor entrance. Viewed from the air day after its surrender, the grotesque ruins of pitted shell holes and ragged walls gave the city the ghostliness of some lunar graveyard. Every house was bomb-scarred. Rubble was often more than a story high. the wrecked church of San Luis stood amid German garrisons. First removed from the debris were American dead, but American casualties were relatively small compared to the German. Hundreds of German graves were counted, and thousands of German soldiers and French civilians were wounded. German and American medical corpsmen brought wounded Germans from 18-foot thick concrete hospital bunkers. Prisoners numbered nearly 40,000. A prisoner bag exceeded only by the 46,000 taken in the Falaise pocket. Some were old, but many were cracked parachute veterans. From the temporary stockade at Landenau, 12 kilometers east of Brest, prisoners were marched to the nearby railroad station, while wounded were transported from the camp by truck and placed aboard hospital trains. Most prisoners realized imminent Nazi defeat and were depressed. But many were arrogant, particularly officers who dressed up for surrender and, bedecked with medals and ribbons, strutted about wearing parade uniforms, ceremonial swords, and black leather breeches. A surrender request of the Nazis was that the Americans protect them from what the commander termed French terrorists, the fighting French. This was wise anticipation. Prisoners had been convoyed amid a great display of civilian liberation and hate. Citizens growled fury at the Nazis, shook jeering fists, cheered their subjugation. And small, irate bands followed the prisoners to the trains, swearing and throwing missiles at them. The Nazis scrambled aboard the freight cars to escape wrath as well as to get places. Brest was a grim example of Nazi resistance. The American campaign was costly in time and supplies. The long battle had laid waste the city, and every trainload of departing Nazis reminded the people of Brest how they had paid for their freedom.
Wounded and weary, they returned from battle. The scars of war borne by these men and by the planes and trains that carried them into combat. Many, too many didn't make it. The others need tender care to help them find that road to healing. There's been enough death and destruction. Now it is time that attention is paid to binding up the wounds of the men who have fought to defend liberty. In these final days of war, the long road home for these wounded warriors begins on the railroad. In Italy, in France, and throughout the theater of war, the railway shop battalions have constructed hospital trains for the United States Army. Because the wounded must be handled carefully while being moved, only passenger coaches in first-class condition are used. These coaches are stripped of interior furnishings, and the fixtures and apparatus necessary for the care of the wounded are installed. The Army Medical Department has carried these men on a journey which began under fire on a stretcher. continued down the roads of war by ambulance, and now ends in a clean and comfortable hospital train. "10 to 15 cars long, these hospitals on wheels will transport up to 350 men at a time from the front lines to the division hospitals. The men are tended by members of the medical corps who aid the doctors and nurses aboard the train. This train is under the command of a physician of the Army Medical Department, usually a captain or major, and is staffed by Army nurses who are usually lieutenants. The hospital train consists of a locomotive pulling several ward cars for stretcher patients, additional ward cars for ambulatory patients and the less seriously wounded, a combined operating room, dressing car, and baggage cars, a kitchen car, and a personnel car. It's all here to take care of you on the road home. Welcome aboard, guys. Down the iron road you roll, back to people and places well remembered and well loved. You think about the days gone by, lulled by the rhythm of the wheels. You think about what this railroad means to you. It's the compassion and caring of the people who tend you. It's the good hot meal after too many rations in the field. Well, Ma's home cooking it's not. But it's nourishment and nurture as you rebuild your strength. It's the gentle music of a woman's voice, as healing as any medicine. It's the answer to so many silent prayers. It's the unspoken joy, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that peace has been restored. Or it's laugh out loud and thank you, God. It's a cup of joe and a friendly conversation. It's time to give thanks for the victory you have won. It's time at last for the peace trains to roll on. And it's all on time, on the great dispatcher's scheduled time. Next stop, your hometown. It was the railroads that supported men in battle. It was the railroads that brought in reinforcements. It was the railroad that transported men from one theater of war to another. But the most important mission of the railroad was to bring our boys back home. It's a cool and rainy night in the railroad junction city of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Union soldiers, their uniforms wet and soaked to the skin. They're sharing the last few rations that they have. Chattanooga, a city under siege, one of the most contested sites of the Civil War. Confederate soldiers surround the city, and Union soldiers are on their last lines of defense. If Chattanooga falls, President Lincoln may never realize his dream of reuniting our nation. Union General Rosecrans realizes that he cannot bring in reinforcements or food by river, by land, or by railroad. The only option for his troops may be starvation or surrender. In Washington, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton presents a plan to the President. His plan is to take the 23,000 troops under the command of General Joseph Hooker to the besieged city of Chattanooga. Hooker's troops are 1,200 miles away from Chattanooga. How can they possibly help? Well, Edwin Stanton's plan is to take them by rail. First take them north, take them west, then take them south through Tennessee, through 7 different states. But take them by rail? Railroads are relatively new at this time, and they're unreliable, sometimes even dangerous. One railroad's lines are sometimes miles away from the others. Different tracks are different gauges. One locomotive can't work on the other. How could this plan possibly work? President Lincoln, knowing there's little alternative, orders Secretary Stanton and Colonel D.C. McCullum, the brilliant military strategist who was then in charge of the military railroad, to devise a plan. The next morning, orders were issued to the military. Just 9 days later, 25,000 troops, 2 Army Corps, along with 10 batteries of artillery and 100 carloads of food, ammunition, and medicine, arrive in Chattanooga, Tennessee. This unparalleled military deployment set the stage for the restoration of the United States of America. It also gave dramatic proof of the importance of the use of railroads in combat strategy. There are many interesting but untold stories about the use of railroads during wartime. So I invite you to join me now for a unique opportunity to be a part of history, to go back in a time machine of sorts, to witness firsthand through newsreels, military combat reports, top secret training films, and footage shot right on the battlefield. This is the story of the war trains. 1861, and the Civil War begins. The urban and highly industrial North has a 21,000-mile railroad system. The railroads run in all 4 directions in a grid-like pattern, linking cities and regions together. The agrarian South has only 9,000 miles of largely unconnected railroads, whose primary purpose is to move crops to market. The railroads run east and west, linking the fields to the ports. During the course of the Civil War, the ability of the armies to use these railroads to supply soldiers in the field and to execute mass movements of troops will be critical to success on the battlefield. Organizing the assets of the railroads will take on unprecedented importance. In the 1860s, the typical locomotive is an 8 or 10-wheeled woodburner, weighing about 55,000 pounds. It has 60-inch drivers and can pull a light train at up to 60 miles per hour. Passenger coaches, boxcars, and flat cars use handbrakes and link and pin couplings, but otherwise are configured much as they are today. The strategic use of this simple equipment will prove to be a decisive factor in determining the outcome of the war. President Abraham Lincoln, a former railroad lawyer, knows that the railroads will be an invaluable means of transporting troops, and the trains will serve as the chief means of supply for the Northern Army. The President uses his emergency powers to place the nation's railroads under military control. Lincoln appoints Colonel D.C. McCullum as military director and superintendent of railroads in the United States, giving birth to the United States military railroad system. McCullum knows that absolute control of the rail lines, rolling stock, tracks, and bridges is essential. Nothing must be wasted, and losses must be kept to an absolute minimum. In combat areas, troops are assigned to guard and protect the railroad bridges. Time and again, railroad junctions become the strategic objectives of major battles. In the South, though no singular railroad strategist emerges, the Confederate Army employs the railroads for long-distance movement of troops. Railroads enable troops to be moved longer distances in much less time. In one remarkable example of troop deployment, the Confederate Army uses trains to move its infantry with numerous transfers 900 miles by rail, in less time than it takes its cavalry to travel 275 miles on horseback. In the North, McCollum's chief deputy in the field is Herman Haupt, the ceaselessly inventive engineer in charge of construction and repair. Haupt is a master both of using the existing railroad and building whatever is needed to support the Army. He proves his skills dramatically by reconstructing the Potomac Creek Railroad trestle after it is reduced to a pile of rubble and broken stone piers by rebel saboteurs. Under Haupt's direction, the ruined bridge, which took an entire year to build, is rebuilt out of raw wood with unskilled labor in just 9 days. President Lincoln comments, "That man Haupt has built a bridge across the Potomac Creek about 400 feet long and nearly 100 feet high, over which loaded trains are running every hour. And upon my word, gentlemen, there is nothing in it but bean poles and corn stalks." For the next 100 years, throughout the course of trains and warfare, soldier railroaders will accomplish similar marvels. The year is 1941. In 7 months, America will enter World War II. The military railway service is reactivated. Thousands of men are being trained how to build, repair, and operate military railway systems for duty overseas. Here in the United States, a special military railway system is being built to act as a proving ground for the thousands of Americans who will be working in the railway operating battalions.
The most gigantic military railroad program in history focuses new interest on Camp Claiborne, pride of the Army Transportation Corps. Railroad operating battalions are trained for the major function of keeping the Iron Horse rolling in overseas theaters of operations. It's part of the long-range plan to solve the vital problem of transporting troops and supplies in pace with the fast-moving Allied offensives on world battlefronts. The activities of these soldiers of the railroad may be partially overlooked. You might even put them into the classification of unsung heroes. But by any name, you're sure to meet up with them somewhere, helping you and your equipment to reach their assigned destinations, safely and in a hurry. Trained to their particular jobs, just as you're trained to handle the gun, the tank, or jeep, they have been made to be ready for real assignments, and they can be found where the fire of battle is at a white heat. For an effective illustration, we move to the North African battle scene, where Army railroad workers wrote heroic chapters during the hectic 6-month campaign. Locomotives and rolling stock had to be serviced 24 hours a day. Strategic rail sections destroyed by the enemy had to be rebuilt almost overnight. Lines to Tunis and Bizerte had to be opened and operated. The logistics of the campaign put extra heavy emphasis on railway links. The assignment was overwhelming. The time was short, but the men of the railroad battalions knew their jobs. Equipment long lacking proper maintenance was given new efficiency. Military railroad traffic at the front increased in carload tonnage. And when the Allied commanders took final accounting of the contributing factors to victory in North Africa, the railroad troops were not forgotten. At this point, the training of these men should again be mentioned. Railroad operating battalions for every front, drilled in the manner to be illustrated in the balance of this film. We've returned to Camp Claiborne and are following the soldier railroad students into the classrooms where the fundamentals of railroad work are expounded. Telegraphy is always essential. The teaching method includes the sending of messages by the instructor, which the students receive by ear and then record on paper. Officers at Camp Claiborne are experienced railroad men, recruited from the nation's major railroads. Actual railroad experience is also looked for among enlisted personnel, with many old-timers in the ranks. Now, an interesting training feature, the step-by-step procedure of getting an Army railroad line into action. First, the chief dispatcher prepares the order for the makeup of a train, as required by the particular situation. A copy of the order is passed on to the dispatcher, whose responsibility it is to call the orderly room for the necessary train crew. In quick order, the men are on their way. The yard master gives orders to the yard foreman for making up the special train. The yard engine the foreman is starting off will be utilized for the purpose of building up the train, beginning with the caboose. Now the job is for the switchman to close the siding from which the engine picked up the caboose and open the siding on which the train will be built up. And before long, the train is completely built up. Each car will serve a definite purpose. They detach the yard engine, and Mr. Iron Horse himself proudly struts out of the roundhouse. The coupling of the engine to the completed train is the next step. Ready to roll. But first, there are a few details. The conductor checks his watch against the master clock in the yardmaster's office and signs the outgoing train register. Then he receives his orders. The engineer also gets the orders. Meanwhile, the rear brakeman climbs aboard the caboose and hangs out the rear lamp. All hands now wear helmets, gas masks, and pistols. All aboard! The military railroad at Camp Claiborne in operation. The line itself is a 50-mile run between Claiborne and Camp Hope. Government-built, owned, and operated, it was originally designed for the sole purpose of training railroad operating battalions. However, it has since served as a valuable transportation link between the two camps for the movement of troops and supplies. Along the line, the train makes a water stop. Every operation of the Army Railroad has been worked out to take the minimum amount of time. There are 8 stations between Claiborne and Polk, and the telegraph operators deliver orders on the run to the engineer and the conductor. Following the policy of advanced unit training, the Army Transportation Corps conducts training under mock combat conditions.
America is at war, solving military transportation problems unique in world history. During 1942, the very first year of the war, the railroads will put forth the greatest voluntary cooperative effort ever seen by private industry, working in tandem with the military and our government. 72% of all freight carried in this country will be done by the railroad. The railroads will move raw materials to factories, troops to training camps, food to population centers. In fact, during 1943 alone, the railroad will move 4.5 times more Army freight than during all of World War I. Because of the billions of dollars spent since World War I to improve all aspects of the railroad systems, including the standardization of equipment and procedures, the railroads are able to avoid the government takeover that occurred during the Civil War and World War I. Instead, movement of both troops and vital materials for military and civilian use are coordinated by the Association of American Railroads and the government's Office of Defense Transportation. This teamwork leads to historic accomplishments. When the threat of enemy submarine attacks stops commercial shipping through the Panama Canal and along the Atlantic coast, it will be the railroads that fill the void. including the transport of nearly 1 million barrels of oil a day from the southwestern United States to the major cities of the East Coast. The railroads will find creative solutions to these difficult transportation problems. But some problems are just bigger than others. Like, for instance, how would you move a Navy ship 1,000 miles across land? Leave it to the railroad to provide the answer. Here is one railroad's innovative way for a half dozen iron and steel contractors in Denver, Colorado to become shipbuilders. In the home yard of the Union Pacific Railroad in Denver, cars carrying locally manufactured sections of a U.S. Navy landing craft are dispatched. The heavy train starts its long trip to the coast, where the sections of the landing craft braced for the rough journey ahead. A locomotive needs at least 4 times more power to pull a train uphill, so a helper engine is added to push the train up the steep grades of the high mountains. The train, laden to capacity, moves on across the rolling plains, eventually reaching the San Francisco Navy Yard. The cars are moved to the assembly ways. The bracing is cast loose, and the train is unloaded. Now the sections of the landing craft are assembled on an inclined track. Rolling down the assembly line, the sections are fitted together, and a hull grows into a ship. After a shakedown cruise to test her systems, the landing craft will be delivered to a combat operations area on top of a larger LST transport ship, from which the landing craft will be launched. From plates of inanimate steel, manufactured in the towering Rockies, a living, breathing fighting machine is ready to storm ashore in Japan. Its journey began on the railroad. During World War II, 90% of military cargo and 97% of military personnel were transported to war by rail from their homes to the training camps to the ports of embarkation. In cars just like this, 44 million men went to war. Imagine this, if we were to transport the same amount of people by automobile, we would have to load a car every 10 seconds, 24 hours a day for 4 years. And we still wouldn't have moved their equipment.
Speeding the machines of war, trucks, motors, tanks, from supply depots inland to ship convoys waiting at seaports, is the war job of America's vast network of 45 great railway systems. Moving an infantry division with full armored equipment requires 65 complete trains, more than 1,350 flat cars and coaches. Army engineers, skilled in the complex problems of supply, supervise the loading. Not a moment is lost. Not a square foot of space is wasted. Equipment loaded and lashed down for the trip, troops go aboard. In this way, millions of men of the armed forces were carried by American railways in the first 10 months of the war. From traffic control towers, railway dispatchers operate fleets of troop and passenger trains over 500,000 miles of track. On every line, troop trains have the right of way. Speed is the watchword. Army cooks set up their commissary departments en route. There's no stopping as fresh troops and supplies are sped across the continent day and night. At embarkation ports, ship captains await the arrival of their war cargoes. And dawn finds the railways delivering the goods on scheduled time. Week after week, these veterans of the throttle are rushing more and more troops to swell the rising tide of armed forces being sent overseas. That the convoys may sail on schedule, American railways are playing an important part in helping the United Nations win the war.
It is January of 1951. At a railroad station in Busan, South Korea, young men ready for war board the trains. With railroad lines running up to the rear areas of infantry divisions, some of these men will be carried all the way to their divisions by rail. Along the way, they will pass the military supply dumps, where every day trains will be loaded with 600 tons of supplies to be delivered to each division. They will also pass hospital trains, evacuating the wounded to the mobile Army surgical hospitals, the famed MASH units. It is October of 1918. At a railroad station in France, the men of the 26th Division board a troop train on the way to the front. They know that their brothers in arms, the soldier railroaders, will work to keep them supplied with the munitions and equipment necessary to win the battles that are before them. Brakemen wait on top the cars, ready to take their positions when the train rolls out of the station. The soldiers pass through the French landscape on the war train. So many lives have been disrupted. So many people find themselves pressed into unfamiliar roles. With their husbands at the front, women now operate the railroad crossings. So much has changed since the days of peace were disturbed by the years of conflict. But the war train continues down its iron road. Across the years, across the generations, across the scenes of conflict, the war train rolls on. The railroad is at the heart of the strategy that will allow these men to be successful in combat. But many battles are before them. Good luck and Godspeed. The year is 1917. For 3 years now, Europe has been involved in a devastating conflict between the German Central Powers and France and England. The United States has remained neutral. Germany is attempting an alliance with Mexico, threatening the entire southern border. But the final straw is when a German submarine sinks an American ocean liner, bringing the United States into the war. President Woodrow Wilson signs a declaration of war saying, "The world must be made safe for democracy." March 1918, we're in the port city of Saint-Nazaire, France, where a vital railroad link runs inland to Paris. Here, the United States military has set up several railway battalions. At home, President Wilson has seized control of the railway systems, which have fallen into disarray since the boom times of profit and achievement at the turn of the 20th century. He formed the United States Railway Administration, which sets new standards for design and production. These standards will lead to unprecedented levels of efficiency and production, both in military factories and in military railway battalions abroad. In the battlefields of Europe, this conflict has become a war of attrition. Railroads can bring reinforcements to the front lines much faster than infantry troops can advance across fields of trenches, barbed wire, and mud. In this war, once again, the goal of the armies will be to take advantage of the railroad speed in mobilizing troops. The Military Railway Service, a branch of the United States Army Corps of Engineers, has been sent to France. There are 20 military railway operating regiments, 6 maintenance of way regiments, 8 car regiments, and 12 locomotive shop regiments here to construct, repair, and operate the railroads. The cars being assembled here are manufactured by the Standard Steel Car Company. Arriving in crates containing a jigsaw puzzle of parts, the assembled cars will carry trucks and tanks, provide housing for the men who work with the field artillery, carry ammunition to the front, and contain portable kitchens and field hospitals. In cars such as these, nearly 4.5 million gross tons of supplies will be transported to the fighting front, reaching a peak in October 1918 of over 8,000 tons per day. These are steel ammunition cars, which will be used to haul shells and powder bags for a variety of heavy railway artillery, including the United States Navy's 14-inch 50 caliber railway gun. Four-wheeled trucks are placed on the rails and the cars are built directly on top of them. This is done for efficiency because when the last rivet is in place, the cars are already on the track and ready to roll. Steel reinforced sides and roof supports are mounted on the car's frame and riveted into place. Some of these ammunition cars will accompany the Navy's 14-inch railway guns. Between the first shot fired on September 6th through the armistice on November 11th, the Navy's heavy railway artillery will fire 782 rounds of 1,400-pound shells at a distance of 17 to 22 miles. Locomotives built to the American standard will supplement the narrow gauge lines in use for frontline traffic in France. The locomotives are also shipped here in pieces and assembled by American soldiers. Baldwin Locomotive Works of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is devoting its entire manufacturing capacity to the construction of railroad equipment for the war. It builds the Iron Warrior, the standard gauge steam locomotive, which will be used for high-speed, long-distance, large-capacity transport. Baldwin will also construct narrow-gauge locomotives and rolling stock, as well as manufacture a total of 6.5 million artillery shells. The name Baldwin has been associated with railroads in combat since the Civil War, when the company introduced a standardized system of interchangeable parts. Baldwin began to develop standardized gauges during the war between the states and had perfected a set of master gauges by the 1890s. During World War I, all parts with machine surfaces are accurately fitted to these master gauges. The Baldwin locomotives assembled here in Saint-Nazaire are consolidation-type engines with a 280 wheel configuration, 21 by 28-inch cylinders, and 56-inch driving wheels. The engine has 35,600 pounds of tractive effort and weighs in at 166,400 pounds. That's 83.2 tons, more than 2.5 times the weight of Baldwin's Civil War locomotives. Here the locomotive's frame is lowered onto its wheels, which are already in place on their axles. The large wheel size indicates that the locomotive is intended for high-speed running over long distances. These men are at work on the cylinders and valve gears. Steam entering the cylinder forces the piston backwards, moving the drive shaft and causing the wheels to turn. At the heart of the Baldwin steam locomotive is its boiler. The boiler barrels are made up of circular steel rings. The semicircular section attaches to the firebox. Boiler tubes run through the boiler from the firebox to the smoke box. These tubes carry the heat of the fire through the water in the boiler and then exhaust the smoke out through the stack. The boiler is placed on its frame. Careful placement is essential, both for proper distribution of weight and for a correct alignment of engine components, such as the firebox's damper doors. The smoke box is at the front end of the locomotive. The smoke box has a hinged door, which is airtight when secured. Controlled airflow comes through the blast pipe of the smoke box, increasing the heat of the fire and expelling the combustion gases. The locomotives are now in the final stages of assembly. From a jumble of parts that arrived in crates at the docks of Saint-Nazaire, the Baldwin locomotive is ready to roll down the road to war. Each completed locomotive is the result of the dedication and ceaseless efforts of dozens of soldier railroaders. The premier accomplishment of the railroads during World War I will be the standardization of equipment and the acceleration of production. By manufacturing these interchangeable parts, the cost of production will decrease substantially, and the speed of repair and assembly will increase dramatically. The first engine built by Baldwin for use in Europe takes 20 days to complete, but by the end of the war, at the height of their capacity, Baldwin will build 300 war locomotives a month. In 1944, Quebec, Canada. The war train delivers English Prime Minister Winston Churchill to a meeting with American President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In this latest of a series of conferences to discuss war strategies, Roosevelt and Churchill will talk about the results of the coordinated Allied war effort. Also on the agenda is a discussion of the transportation of munitions to Russia as they continue their attempts to break down German defenses on the Russian front.
Carrying a load of supplies for Russia, a United States Army train pulls into Tehran, Iran, for special ceremonies honoring the sending of huge tonnages of war materiel to Russia. American General Theodore Osborne of the Persian Gulf Command breaks a bottle of vodka over the powerful diesel locomotive. Through the rugged Iranian countryside, over great plains and high mountains on the Iran to Russia route, vast quantities of American-made weapons and supplies of war have been delivered to the Russian ally. The freight yards of Tehran are a vital junction between the American and Russian war machines. In formal ceremonies, high officers of the American and Russian armies pay tribute to work performed by the men and women of their commands. The special train comes in, now drawn by a Russian locomotive with Russian personnel. Major General Donald H. Connolly, commanding general of the Persian Gulf Command, officially turns the cargo over to the commander of Soviet forces in Iran, General Ivan Kargin. The train's flags are transferred from American to Russian guards of honor. General Connolly congratulates the Russian girl fireman, Valentina Vervahova, a veteran of this vital railroad route, which has played an invaluable role in supporting and supplying the great Russian offensives.
(1944). The war train rolls into Berlin, delivering Adolf Hitler's military leaders to an audience with the German dictator. Hitler's goal of world conquest, beginning with the total domination of Europe, has begun to unravel on all fronts. Hitler's expansionism reflects a renewed German nationalism. Hitler was a soldier in World War I, when German militarism was a principal cause of the breach of world peace. In both wars, a determined Allied response crushes Germany's threat to freedom. It's November of 1917, and the German army has occupied many regions of France. In preparation for their occupation and capture of Paris, the German army moves up heavy artillery capable of firing 25 miles. Now, the Allies and the United States have no guns of this size that can fire that far. As a matter of fact, guns of this size are virtually non-existent in the continental United States. But they do have guns of this size on United States Navy ships. And the decision is made at this time to put Navy guns on railway mounts. Now in July of 1918, components for the Navy guns and their artillery trains arrive in Saint-Nazaire. Here the American military is building the answer to Germany's firepower. Because gun design had been revolutionized at the turn of the century, many armies, including the French and the Americans, find themselves short of modern equipment during World War I. Heavy railway artillery is an answer to the shortage of firepower. These mounted railway guns are built by Baldwin Locomotive Works, which also manufactures 6.5 million shells for all types of artillery. Before the armistice, Baldwin will build 11 railway guns. 5 go to the Navy. The other 6 will go to the Army. Though there are distinct individual differences, the mounting for most heavy railway artillery is similar in design. It consists of steel plates attached to 2 side girders, joined together by cross braces. This framework is supported upon 2 front and 2 rear 6-wheel bogies, a grouping of wheels. The gun features a fast-loading screw-type breech. The 14-inch artillery's gun, cradle, and recoil system are largely Navy standard patterns, allowing the weapon to fire shells weighing 1,400 pounds, a maximum range of 42,000 yards, or 23.9 miles. Each artillery battery is made up into a train consisting of a locomotive, a gun car, ammunition cars, a workshop car, and cars for construction, berthing, and kitchen use. Fittings are checked carefully, and the final steps in the preparation of the gun include paint and polish. Notice that unlike other heavy railway artillery, the design for the Navy 14-inch gun features an enclosed body which covers the breech end. Here Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in civilian clothes, confers with Rear Admiral C.P. Plunkett. Roosevelt, the 36-year-old Assistant Secretary of the Navy, strides alongside Admiral Plunkett for a tour of inspection before the gun leaves for the front. This weapon will be invaluable in the field against German positions. Even in the American railroad yard, it is guarded around the clock. These are the officers and the men of the United States Naval Railway Battery, whose work on these guns will help to win the war. Here in France, 60-centimeter narrow-gauge track is being used by the railroads for logistical supply. In the United States, factories producing supplies for the railroads are geared up to produce standard gauge equipment. So standard gauge tracks are used here in France to transport men and equipment longer distances at higher speeds. Narrow gauge track and equipment, already in place in France, is used for low-speed transport on low-grade roads. Since French military railway bridges and tunnels are already laid with narrow gauge equipment, this gauge is extended forward to the front lines. The track is laid quickly in areas where it can follow natural grades, avoiding cuts and fills. Long in use in mines, quarries, and industrial areas, narrow gauge track is less costly and lighter weight than standard gauge track. Trainload after trainload of raw materials are brought to the places where new rail lines will be built. This includes wooden ties and steel ties, rails of iron or steel, and prefabricated track. The men are well trained in the procedures to follow to lay new track efficiently and expeditiously. The narrow gauge track reaches forward to the battle lines from supply dumps on standard gauge lines. More than 13,000 U.S. Army troops are engaged in the construction and operation of these light railways. From the men who survey the land to the troops who lay the ties, these railroad soldiers are building rail links that will play an invaluable role in delivering supplies to Americans fighting at the front. There is a precision in their movements and a plan to be followed. They lay ties to build a spur for the quartermaster warehouse. They lay steel rails that will be the lifeline conveying ammunition and supplies to the First Army. They haul rock to study the line running into newly captured territory. The roadbeds require a ballast of gravel, cinders or crushed stone to stabilize the track. From American-operated quarries, gondola cars are filled with crushed rock for use as ballast. Barges also haul ballast for the roadbeds. The filled gondola cars are taken directly to the site of track construction and unloaded. Soon the men marching to the front will be able to be transported there by rail. These railroad soldiers will build or repair more than 300 miles of narrow-gauge railroad track. On this track, more than 860,000 gross tons of supplies, up to 8,100 tons in a single day, will be rushed to the front. These men who fight with ties and rails play a role as important to the war effort as those who fight with rifles. These are the men of the American Expeditionary Force Division of Light Railways and Roads, and they are called the 301st Military Railway Service, the 21st Light Railway Engineers, the 528th Engineers Service Battalion, Colored Troops, the 1st Pioneer Infantry. Both narrow gauge and standard gauge rail lines are essential to the success of an army at war. These railroads will become the roads to peace. Another track is completed, and another war train rolls on. If the railroad is the lifeblood of transportation to the battlefront, the trench engine is its muscle. These small but powerful armored engines are used on the narrow-gauge railways for hauling munitions and supplies. Built by American troops in France, trench engines have lower profiles than standard-gauge road engines, as well as armored, reinforced bodies. Supply dumps, which store an army's munitions and rations, are often on standard gauge railroads located at a distance from the front lines, in areas that are relatively secure from enemy attack and takeover. These supply depots are located at railheads, where standard gauge railroads and narrow gauge railroads meet. The transfer of men and materials from one gauge of equipment to the other are made at these railheads. Here the trench engine, with its train of rations and supplies, begins its journey to the front lines, through the fields and villages of war-torn France. It is cheered on by men who have labored in the name of liberty, by men who know the dangers that are found along the Iron Road. The war train passes infantry and cavalry troops protecting a recently recaptured village. The front is less than 5 miles away, but life goes on in this village, caught between the memory of tranquility and the presence of conflict. One month ago at Chateau Thierry, troops of the U.S. 2nd Division stopped the German advance on Paris. Now, on the eve of the 4th of July, 1918, these American troops in France transferred to a narrow-gauge rail line on their way to combat. They are far from home, and the fireworks they are soon to encounter are of the lethal variety. Though we do not know their names, we will remember their faces. The trench engine approaches the front lines. 1 mile away, the Allied troops are preparing an assault on German strongholds. The soldiers of the Iron Rail have completed their mission, bringing food, equipment, supplies, and medicine all the way to the fighting front. This is not a machine. It is the handiwork of freedom. This is the love of liberty made manifest, the tradition of working together for the common good, the legacy of pride in country, and the courage to sacrifice to preserve freedom. This is the railroad, and these are the war trains. The road ahead will bring the trials of war, but in the hearts of these men, a simple dream lives on. It is a dream of the day that the railroad will carry them back home, back to the blessings of peace. So may God bless the railroad, and may God bless the soldiers of the Iron Road.